I walked into my grandmother's memorial dinner just in time to hear my family raise their glasses to my absence. "It's great that she didn't come," Aunt Lenora said, smiling into the candlelight. "This will be much easier." A few people gave the thin, nervous laughs people use when they want to stay close to power. My brother Nolan lifted his glass. My father did not correct her. My mother kept her eyes on the flowers in the center of the table, as if silence might keep her clean. Then Nolan, calm and polished in the navy suit he wore whenever he wanted to look responsible, said, "To moving forward." That was when I stepped through the door. The room froze in pieces. The waiter stopped with one hand still on the handle. My cousin Bree lowered her fork. Uncle Randall looked at me, then at Nolan, then down at the table. No one stood. No one apologized. The only person who did not look caught was Nolan. He set down his glass and smiled at me, as if I were the one who had interrupted something reasonable. I had spent the last 6 years handling June Holloway's medications, appointments, insurance calls, and the long quiet hours nobody in this family ever volunteered for. I was the granddaughter hospice called first, the one who knew which cardigan she wanted when she was cold, and which tea she could still swallow when the nausea got bad. And now, 11 days after we buried her, I was standing in the doorway of her memorial dinner while my family drank to how convenient it would be if I stayed gone. I handed my coat to the waiter. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. That seemed to unsettle my mother more than my arrival. "Olivia," she said. "We thought you weren't coming." I glanced at the clock above the wine cabinet. 7:12. "You told me dinner started at 7:30. A silence settled over the room that felt heavier because it had a time attached to it. My father moved first, stepping into the gap the way he always had. There must have been some confusion. "There wasn't," I said. Nolan leaned back in his chair. "Let's not make this into a scene." That line would have worked better if I had been the one speaking loudly. Instead, I looked around the room. The private suite at Bell and Rose had been arranged like a formal tribute. Ivory candles, white flowers, framed photographs of my grandmother. A custom board by the window that read, "Celebrating June Holloway's Legacy." Below it, in smaller gold lettering, "Hosted by the Holloway family and Nolan Holloway." Not Olivia Holloway. Not the granddaughter who had paid the deposit for this dinner when my mother said she could not handle one more detail. Not the woman who had held June's hand through the end while Nolan found reasons to be elsewhere. My name had not been forgotten. It had been removed. Then I noticed the table itself. Every seat was set. Every napkin folded. Every glass placed. Except mine. An extra chair sat at the far end, angled slightly away, like an afterthought they might use only if they had to. A waiter appeared behind me with a last-minute place setting, so that had been deliberate too. But what changed the shape of the night was not the missing plate. It was the blue folder beside Nolan's hand. "Mercer. Vale." I knew the silver embossing immediately. I had spent Tuesday afternoon at that law firm reviewing the hospice reimbursements and the schedule for Monday's trust meeting. They had made one thing very clear. No distribution file would be released to family before then. Yet here it was. Opened. Flagged. Resting beside my brother's plate. My eyes stopped on it for 1 second. Nolan noticed and covered the folder with his hand. Small movement. Fast movement. Guilty movement. That told me enough. This was not just a cruel dinner. It was a staged one. Aunt Lenora gave a soft, impatient sigh. "Honestly, Olivia, we were only getting started. Don't turn every inconvenience into an accusation." I looked at her, then at the missing place setting, then at the tribute board with my name gone, then at Nolan's hand over the folder he should not have had. "Inconvenience?" I said. No one answered. I walked to the memorial display and picked up one of the framed photos. It was one I had taken at the lake house 2 summers earlier. My grandmother sat on the dock in a pale cardigan, smiling into the light. In the original, my daughter Ava had been beside her with a melting popsicle and bare summer shoulders. Here, Ava had been cropped out. That hurt differently. The lake house was not just property to me. It was where June took me after my miscarriage, when I could not stand the sound of other people trying to comfort me. It was where Ava learned to float. It was where my grandmother, even after her memory began loosening, still remembered where the spare key was hidden and how many steps led down to the dock. If they were erasing me from this evening, they were testing whether they could erase me from what she left behind. "Sit down, Olivia," my mother said. It was not an invitation. It was containment. The waiter with the extra setting looked between us. I spared him the discomfort. "Put it there," I said. I took the chair at the end of the table, not because they had made room for me, but because I wanted to see every face. I smoothed my napkin over my lap and lifted my water glass. "To Grandma," I said. They echoed it because refusing would have exposed too much too early. I took one sip and set the glass down. Then I looked at Nolan again. At the estate folder. At the tribute board. At my mother, who had lied about the time. At my father, who had tried to relabel planning as confusion. "This is a memorial dinner," my father said. "Not the place for estate issues." "Then why is the Mercer and Vale folder beside Nolan's plate?" I asked. That changed the room more than the toast had. Bree looked at the folder immediately. Randall reached for his water and missed the glass the first time. My mother's face tightened. Even Lenora stopped performing ease. Nolan did not move his hand. "You're making assumptions," he said. "No," I said. "I'm noticing timing." That was the truth of it. The false start time. The missing name. The removed place setting. The cropped photograph. The estate folder released before Monday. None of it was accidental. It was sequencing. Tonight was never meant to include me, honestly. I was supposed to hear about it afterward, when the room had already absorbed the picture they wanted fixed in everyone's mind. Nolan as the center. Nolan as the responsible grandchild. Nolan as the natural heir sitting beside the file. I folded my hands beside my plate and let the silence stretch. "That folder," I said. "How did you get it before Monday?" No one answered. Outside the windows, the river moved black under the city lights. Inside, my family sat around my grandmother's memorial table with their first public move already starting to crack. And by the time the first course arrived, I was no longer wondering whether they had tried to erase me. I was wondering which one of them had made the first mistake serious enough to bring the whole structure down. No one answered my question. That was answer enough for the first few seconds. Then my mother reached for her water glass, not because she was thirsty, but because she needed something in her hand. "Olivia," she said, her voice low and careful. "This is not the evening for suspicion." I kept my eyes on Nolan. Then it should have been easy to answer. He leaned back slightly, still covering the Mercer and Vale folder with one hand. "You're acting like a file on a table is some kind of crime." "It might be," I said. That was the first moment my father looked directly at me with something sharper than annoyance. "Watch your tone." I almost smiled at that. They had raised a glass to my absence at my grandmother's memorial dinner, stripped my name from the display, cropped my daughter out of the photographs, lied about the start time, and placed estate material beside my brother's plate before the formal meeting. But my tone was still the emergency. I picked up my menu and unfolded it as if this were still a meal, and not an opening move. The paper was thick, expensive, and professionally finished. At the bottom, in small gray italics, was the event coordinator's credit line. "Program finalized Wednesday, 2:18 p.m. Wednesday. Yesterday. I had spent Wednesday at Street Catherine's school helping Ava choose a reading ribbon for the remembrance table we were setting up in my grandmother's church foyer. My mother knew that. She had texted me at noon asking whether I could also bring the blue photo album to the funeral because Nolan was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed, apparently, enough to host a dinner with custom materials and private legal access. I set the menu down. "Who finalized the print order?" My Aunt Lenora let out a short laugh. "Honestly, Olivia, are you conducting an audit?" "No," I said. "I'm trying to understand why my name disappeared between the deposit and the dinner." That moved across the table differently than anger would have. It was measurable, specific. It forced details into the room. Bree looked up at the display board again. Randall stared at the menu in front of him like he was suddenly seeing it for the first time. My mother's face tightened in small, disciplined stages. She was very good at controlling expression when she thought she still had room to recover. Nolan answered first. Mom simplified the host line. That's all. My mother turned to him too quickly. Tiny mistake. It told me he had spoken out of turn. I asked the coordinator to make it cleaner, she said. Cleaner, I repeated. She must have heard what that word sounded like in the room because she added, for the format. Not for me? I asked. Don't twist everything, my father snapped. I looked at him, then at the menu, then at the display board. I don't have to. The first course sat untouched in front of most of us. The fish cooling under its sauce, the green beans losing their shine. Outside the windows, traffic moved along the river road in slow white lines. Inside, the whole room had narrowed to the space between Nolan's hand and the folder. Then Randall, who usually avoided conflict so thoroughly he could turn a house fire into a scheduling issue, cleared his throat. I thought the attorney meeting was Monday. There it was, the first crack not made by me. Nolan's eyes shifted toward him for less than a second. It is. Randall glanced at the folder. Then why is that here? Because I asked for a summary, Nolan said. A summary from Mercer and Vale? I asked. Before the family meeting? He shrugged, too casual. I'm her grandson, too. That line was meant to sound natural. It didn't. Not after the missing name, the false start time, and the toast to my absence. Not after the display board placed him alone beside the legacy of a woman whose decline he had mostly experienced through forwarded updates and selective visits. I took a sip of water and let the silence do some of the work for me. Then I turned to my mother. Did you ask the firm to release materials early? She looked almost offended by the directness. Of course not. My father came in immediately after. This conversation ends now. But it didn't. Because the waiter had just approached Nolan's side of the table to refill wine, and as Nolan shifted his arm, the corner of a yellow flag lifted from the folder. Across the tab, in block print, I saw one word. Property. Not reimbursement. Not memorial instructions. Not church logistics. Property. The lake house sat so clearly in my mind that for 1 second I could smell cedar and cold water. Ava on the dock. My grandmother wrapped in the blue blanket she kept in the hall closet. Her voice, thinner near the end but still dry enough to make me laugh, telling me, some people start measuring a house before the body is cold. At the time I had told her not to say things like that. Now I wished I had listened harder. I put my glass down carefully. What property summary did you need before the funeral dinner, Nolan? He gave me a look that was supposed to read as pity. You're exhausted, Liv. That's obvious. But you're making ordinary planning sound sinister. Ordinary planning doesn't require lying about the time. My mother finally lost a degree of control. We moved dinner up because the restaurant had a conflict. I turned to her. Then why didn't you tell me? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Another answer. Bree looked at her lap. Randall reached for his bread and put it back. Lenora stared into her drink, suddenly unwilling to contribute now that the details were beginning to attach themselves to actual decisions. Only my father still believed authority alone might save the evening. This family has been through enough, he said. Your grandmother is gone. We are not going to sit here and let you interrogate everyone because you're upset. That would have worked better if I had sounded upset. Instead, I unfolded my napkin, refolded it once, and placed it neatly beside my plate. I'm not interrogating everyone. I'm identifying who knew. Nobody moved. That sentence did something the others had not. It shifted the problem from emotion to participation. People stopped wondering whether I felt hurt, and started wondering whether they had been seen. I looked at the display board again. Hosted by the Holloway family and Nolan Holloway. My deposit had covered the room, the menus, and the floral package. I knew because I had transferred the payment myself from the account I used for June's medical overflow expenses, the same account Nolan once called your little control fund. When he was angry, I would not reimburse one of his gas receipts. The coordinator had sent me the confirmation directly. The original proof was still in my inbox. And if the print line had been finalized on Wednesday, then someone had made changes after my payment cleared. That was the first sign of the deeper shape underneath all this. Not just exclusion. Replacement with administrative steps. I pulled out my phone. My father's voice hardened. Put that away. I'm checking the event confirmation. There is no need, my mother said too fast. I looked at her. That's interesting. Nolan's jaw tightened for the first time that night. Olivia. No, I said quietly. You all wanted me late. I'm here now. I opened my email, not rushing, not performing. The subject line appeared almost immediately. Belle and Rose private memorial package. Confirmation. I tapped it open and scrolled to the attachment receipt. Deposit received from Olivia Holloway. Event host name submitted. Olivia Holloway Family Memorial Dinner for June Holloway. Not Nolan. Not the Holloway family in abstract. Me. I did not show it yet. Not because I was unsure, but because timing mattered more than outrage. If I put it on the table too soon, they would scramble into excuses before the room had fully understood that the wrongness here was not emotional. It was structural. So I locked my phone and set it face down beside my plate. That small motion made Nolan more alert than any accusation had. He knew I had found something. My mother saw his face and understood it too. Can we please? She said softer now. Just get through tonight? There it was. Not denial. Not indignation. A plea for sequencing. For delay. For one more meal before consequences started taking shape. I looked around the table. At Bree, already shrinking away from whatever story she had agreed to sit inside. At Randall, whose loyalty had limits whenever paperwork became real. At Lenora, who enjoyed cruelty most when it stayed social. And never became verifiable. At my father, who still thought volume could take the place of facts. At Nolan, hand on the folder, watch on his wrist, trying to inhabit an inheritance before it had been legally tested. Then I looked at my mother. Who told Belle and Rose to remove my name? I asked. She did not answer. But this time, she did something worse. She looked at Nolan before she looked away. And that was all I needed to know for now. My mother's eyes flicked toward Nolan. And that was enough to change the room. Bree saw it first. Randall saw it a second later. Even Aunt Lenora, who had spent the evening treating cruelty like good table manners, went quiet. My father noticed it too, which was why he pushed his chair back and said with sudden authority, "This has gone far enough." "It hasn't," I said. No one touched the first course. The waiter approached, sensed the tension, and stepped away without clearing a plate. That small retreat made the whole thing feel public in a way my family would have hated. We were no longer just having a difficult dinner. We were becoming a scene other people would remember. My mother folded her hands. I changed the host line because Nolan was helping with the estate follow-up. Helping who? I asked. The family. That isn't an answer. Nolan let out a soft breath. You're turning a memorial dinner into an audit. I looked at him. You have a legal estate file before the formal meeting. My name was removed from an event I paid for. I was given the wrong time. This stopped being a dinner before I walked in. That landed harder than I expected because now the facts were simple enough to hold in one hand. Randall finally looked at the folder. What exactly is in there? A preliminary overview, Nolan said. Of what? He hesitated. Tiny pause, then, property, taxes, maintenance, things that need attention. Property. The word settled coldly in my chest. June Holloway's estate had accounts, keepsakes, and paperwork. But there was only one thing in the family that people referred to as property in that tone. The lake house. I saw it at once. The dock, the pine cabinets, Ava's drawings still clipped to the side of the refrigerator, the blue blanket Grandma kept folded by the sofa, because evenings by the water always turned cooler than people expected. That house was not just an asset. It was memory made physical. If Nolan got control of it, he would not only get land, he would get the family story. I kept my voice level. What property summary did you need before the funeral dinner? Nolan gave me a tired look. You're exhausted, Liv. That's obvious. But you're making normal planning sound sinister. Normal planning doesn't require a false start time. My mother stepped in too quickly. We moved dinner up because the restaurant had a scheduling conflict. I turned to her. Then why didn't you tell me? She opened her mouth, closed it. Across the table, Bree looked down. Lenora stared into her wine. My father's face tightened, but he said nothing. It was the kind of silence that happens when a lie has reached the end of its useful life. Then the second course arrived. The waiter set a plate in front of Nolan. Nolan shifted the folder to make room, and one loose page slid halfway out. He caught it too late. The paper turned once against the tablecloth and stopped under the candlelight with the heading exposed. Preliminary transfer scenarios. Holloway Lake property. No one needed me to read it aloud. Bree inhaled sharply. Randall stared at the page. My mother did not move toward it. That detail mattered most. A person who had truly not known would have reacted on instinct. She stayed still, because she already knew. Nolan shoved the page back into the folder. It's not finalized. I looked at him. Transfer to whom? You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being precise. Randall turned to my father. Transfer scenarios? My father's voice came out flat. Estate planning involves options. Before Monday? Bree asked quietly. No one answered her. I reached for my phone and opened the Tuesday email from Mercer and Vale. I did not have to search long. The line was already in my head because the wording had been so careful. No preliminary transfer discussions will be conducted with any beneficiary outside the formal meeting structure. I stood just enough to angle the screen toward my mother first. Her face lost color before she could stop it. Then I turned it slightly so Randall and Bree could see. Bree read it faster. Then how did he get that? Nolan's voice sharpened. You don't know what you're looking at. I do, I said. And now, for the first time that night, the room no longer belonged to whoever had set the trap. It belonged to the contradiction. The wrong time. My missing name. The host line changed after I paid. The folder released early. The page title. The firm's written rule. None of it alone would have been enough. Together, it formed intent. Lenora leaned back in her chair, distancing herself without saying so. Randall stopped pretending this was just family friction. Bree looked physically smaller, as if she had finally understood she had been invited to witness something uglier than favoritism. My father still looked angry, but it was the anger of someone losing control of sequence, not of someone defending truth. Nolan rested one hand on the folder and said, The house needs management. Somebody has to think practically. There it was. Not grief. Not tribute. Not confusion. Positioning. He had already moved himself into the role of decision-maker. I looked at the folder, then at my mother, then at the tribute board with my name removed, and understood that this had started before tonight. The dinner was only the public version. The real move had happened earlier, while I was still arranging funeral details and trusting grief to impose some limit on what family would do. I folded my hands beside my plate. Did Grandma ever approve any transfer discussion before she died? I asked. This time, the silence was not defensive. It was afraid. No one answered my question. That silence mattered more than any denial could have. If my grandmother had approved transfer discussions before she died, someone at that table would have said so immediately. No one did. My father tried first. June was clear that the family should act in everyone's best interest. I held his gaze. That is not what I asked. Nolan kept one hand on the folder. Grandma knew the house was expensive. That still isn't approval. He smiled tightly. You really want to do this here? I looked around the table. You already did. That ended the last bit of pretense. This was no longer about hurt feelings or timing. It was about structure. And structure was where Nolan had always been weakest. He was good at occupying a room. I was better at keeping records. I unlocked my phone and opened the trust summary Mercer and Vale had sent after Tuesday's meeting. My father's voice sharpened at once. Put that away. No. I found the line I needed and read it aloud. The Holloway Lake property remains under trust protection pending formal review. No transfer, sale, or exclusive use assignment may be initiated outside trustee procedure. Randall frowned. Trust protection? I turned the screen slightly so he and Bree could see it. The lake house was never just sitting there waiting for Nolan to step into it. It's protected until the formal review. Bree looked from my phone to the folder by Nolan's plate. Then what are transfer scenarios for? No one answered her. I did. For momentum, I said. If the room accepts him first, the process becomes easier to push later. My mother's face tightened. That is unfair. Then explain the host line. Explain the wrong time. Explain the folder. Explain why there's a transfer page for a property that can't even be reviewed that way before Monday. She said nothing. Nolan tried to recover. The review was going to happen anyway. Yes, I said. On Monday. With everyone there. Not everyone needs every detail. That sentence told the truth more clearly than he meant it to. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed clause summary I had kept from the last amendment. I unfolded it and placed it on the table. At the center of the page was the line Nolan had not expected me to bring into the room. For any proposed occupancy, management delegation, or transfer consideration relating to the Holloway Lake property, notice must be provided to both named granddaughters before review. Bree read the last part under her breath. Both named granddaughters? I nodded. Me and Daphne. Nolan's expression changed. Daphne has nothing to do with the house. She's named in the notice clause, I said. So yes, she does. My father leaned forward. This is exactly why we wanted to handle some things quietly first. The whole table went still. He realized what he had admitted a second too late. My mother closed her eyes. Lenora looked down into her drink. Randall stared at my father as if he had finally heard the truth in the family's real language. I repeated it calmly. Quietly first. That's not what I meant, he said. It's exactly what you meant. Now the structure was visible. My deposit had paid for the room. My name had been removed afterward. The time had been changed to keep me out. The folder appeared early. The property page existed before formal notice. And the trust itself required notice to 2 granddaughters before any review of occupancy, management, or transfer. This was not grief. It was sequencing. Nolan made one last attempt to sound practical. The house needs repairs. Taxes are up. Insurance is up. Someone has to manage it. You mean someone has to sound informed in front of relatives? I said. He stared at me. I opened another file on my phone. The dock inspection in February was a weather delay hold, not a structural failure. And the current insurance adjustment isn't the figure you just implied. Randall looked at Nolan. Bree did too. That was enough. I did not need to say more. The room understood what I wanted it to understand. He had the language of control, but not the records. He was performing management, not doing it. Then I placed one last paper beside the trust clause. The Bell and Rose reservation confirmation. At the top, host contact, Olivia Holloway. At the bottom, change request time-stamped Wednesday afternoon. My mother lost color when she saw it. Wednesday afternoon was when she had texted me asking for the blue photo album because Nolan was overwhelmed. While I was handling funeral details, she had been editing me out of the room I paid for. That was just for presentation, she said. No, I said. It was for positioning. No one corrected me. That was the reveal. Not just that Nolan wanted the house, that my family had already begun converting grief into administrative advantage. Change the room, change the host line, move the time, secure the file, center the sun, and let the visuals do the rest before procedure could stop them. I folded my hands beside my plate and left the papers where everyone could see them. The house doesn't move through you quietly, I said to Nolan. Not legally, not procedurally, and not tonight. This time, no one tried to call me dramatic, because the structure was finally speaking for itself. No one argued after that, not because they agreed with me, but because the papers on the table had taken away their safest weapon, ambiguity. My mother reached first for the Bell and Rose confirmation, not the trust clause, and that told me exactly where her guilt lived. She was less afraid of what Nolan had tried to do with Mercer and Vale than of the part she had played herself. She had changed the host line, lied about the time, and help stage a cleaner version of the family before any formal process could justify it. I only changed the presentation because tonight needed to stay calm, she said, tracing the timestamp with one finger. I looked at her. Calm for who? My father answered before she could. For everyone. No, I said. For Nolan. That landed because it was simple, and simple things survive denial better than speeches do. Nolan let out a short laugh that carried no ease in it. You always make me the villain. I turned to him. Did you ask Mom to remove my name? He held my gaze for a moment, then said, I asked her not to turn it into a contest. That was not a denial. Around the table, people understood that. Bree went still. Randall looked toward the window, and then back at Nolan. Even Lenora stopped performing indifference. Nolan had not objected to excluding me. He had objected to my presence competing with the image he wanted fixed in the room. I folded the reservation page once and set it down. When did this start? No one answered, so I made the question smaller and harder to dodge. Was it before Grandma died? My mother's face changed first. Just enough for me to know the answer before anyone spoke. My father tried to step in front of it. No decisions were made. That isn't what I asked. My mother's fingers tightened on the paper. Your grandmother knew we had to think ahead. She knew you wanted to think ahead, I said. Did she know you were discussing transfer scenarios before she was buried? My mother went silent again, and Nolan stepped in the way he always had when silence became dangerous. No one was stealing anything. I looked at him. You came to her memorial dinner with a transfer page for the lake house. It wasn't finalized. You weren't supposed to have it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. And for one brief second, he looked exactly like the boy he had always been when cornered, not powerful, not strategic, just angry that the rules had started applying while he was still performing confidence. Lenora tried to rescue the moment with sentiment. June wouldn't have wanted the house to become a burden. That word settled badly in the room. Burden. It was what people called things they had never truly carried. June's care had been a burden when they wanted distance from it. The house was a burden now that it required more than nostalgia. Her preferences were sentimental whenever they stood in the way of convenience. I turned to Lenora. Did you visit her at the lake last summer? She blinked. That has nothing to do with... Did you? No. I looked at Randall. Did you? He shook his head once. Then I turned to my father. Did you go after Labor Day? His jaw tightened. No. Finally, I looked at Nolan. Did you sit with her on the dock in October when she couldn't remember the month but still asked whether the loons had nested farther north that year? He said nothing. I did not wait for him to. Did you hear her tell Ava that the house should never belong to whoever loved it least and wanted it most? The line changed the room because it sounded exactly like June, dry, sharp, too honest to be decorative. My mother closed her eyes. Randall looked down. Bree turned toward the window and pressed her lips together. Even Nolan did not try to call it false. He knew better. He had heard versions of that sentence his whole life. That was the deeper injury, and by then everyone at the table could feel it. They had not simply wanted the house. They had begun moving its meaning away from the people who had actually kept showing up. While I was still handling medications, funeral details, and Ava's school schedule, they had been preparing a version of the family in which care did not count, memory did not count, and presence could be cut out if it complicated succession. I picked up the framed photograph they had cropped Ava out of and held it for a moment. In the original, my daughter was in this picture, I said quietly. No one moved. The child Grandma taught to float at that house. The child who still thinks the blue guest room is hers because June let her keep seashells in the bedside drawer. My mother looked at the frame then, really looked at it, and I watched recognition move across her face in slow, painful pieces. I didn't notice that, she said. I believed her, which made it worse. She had not even noticed that cutting me out also meant cutting out the child my grandmother had folded into the life of that house. Saturday pancakes. Small towels warmed after swimming. Plastic cups in the lower cabinet, because June liked children to reach what belonged to them without asking. Bree spoke so softly I almost missed it. That's awful. This time, no one corrected her. My father straightened in his chair. No one intended to hurt Ava. I looked at him. But you did. He had no answer for that, because intent was no longer the shield he wanted it to be. Harm does not become cleaner, just because it was arranged politely. The candles had burned lower by then, and one had begun to spill wax down the holder beside the display board. The room smelled faintly of cooling food, wine, and expensive flowers, already starting to fade. It no longer looked like a memorial dinner. It looked like a set after the actors had forgotten their lines. I set the photograph down and turned back to my mother. Did Grandma know you changed the host line? No. Did she know you moved the time? No. Did she know Nolan was requesting transfer scenarios? My mother did not speak. My father answered instead. Your grandmother was very tired near the end. That was the moral reveal. And once it appeared, no one at the table could honestly reduce the evening to misunderstanding anymore. They had used her decline the same way they had used my patience as cover. She was too tired. I was too responsible. Between those two conditions, they had imagined they could move the room, the file, and the story. Nolan leaned forward. You're twisting this into something ugly. No, I said. It was ugly before I arrived. Then my phone lit up beside my plate. A message from Daphne. Just landed. Checking in. Did Mercer and Vale send anything out early? Nolan left me a strange voicemail about streamlining occupancy. Call if needed. I read it once and locked the screen without showing it yet. The timing was almost perfect, but not because luck had finally turned in my favor. It was because people who move too early inside a structure usually forget how many other people that structure still has to notify. I looked back at my mother. You didn't just leave me off a board, I said. You started rehearsing a version of this family that worked better if the people who kept showing up could be cut out of the picture. That line landed hardest on her. Fathers like mine hide in authority. Brothers like Nolan hide in entitlement. Mothers have to live longer with the arrangement they help build. Her eyes filled, but I felt no urge to comfort her. By then, comfort would only have helped them continue. So I sat back, folded my hands, and let the truth remain where it had finally landed. For the first time that night, no one at the table looked at Nolan as the natural center of anything. Daphne's message sat on my phone like a second witness waiting outside the room. I did not show it immediately. Timing mattered too much now. If I put it on the table too early, Nolan would try to recast it as confusion, a misheard voicemail, a cousin out of context. I wanted him to commit to the next move first. People like my brother were most useful when they thought they still had room to recover. He leaned back and forced a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Are we done now? No, I said. My father exhaled through his nose. Olivia. I looked at him. You changed the time to keep me out. You changed the room to make Nolan look central. You brought transfer material for a protected trust asset to a memorial dinner. And now another named granddaughter is texting me because Nolan left her a voicemail about streamlining occupancy before Monday. So no, we are not done. That hit the table harder than if I had raised my voice. My mother looked up sharply. Daphne? I unlocked the phone and turned the screen just enough for Bree and Randall to see first, then angled it toward the center of the table. I did not hand it to anyone. I wanted them to read it where it lay, like one more piece of structure they had failed to control. Bree read it under her breath. Randall read it more slowly, then looked at Nolan with the expression people get when they realize they have been invited to witness something they may later be asked to deny. Nolan's face tightened. That proves nothing. It proves you contacted another named granddaughter before the formal review, I said. After telling this table everything was ordinary planning. She's family. Suani. He looked away first. That was when my father made his choice. He pushed back his chair and stood, not in grief or outrage, but in the old family instinct to turn pressure into authority. This ends now. We will discuss estate matters privately. No, I said, still seated. The room went very still. He had expected the usual thing from me. Explanation, softening, maybe a compromise disguised as maturity. What he got instead was a refusal clean enough for everyone to hear. This became public when you made my absence part of the evening, I said. You don't get to move it back behind closed doors because the room stopped working for you. My mother stood too, but only halfway, caught between going after my father and trying to salvage Nolan. Olivia, please! There are people here. I almost smiled. Exactly. That was the problem with what they had done. They had wanted witnesses for the visual transfer, the host line, the seating, the folder beside Nolan's plate, but not witnesses for the contradiction. Now they had both. Nolan picked up the folder and tucked it under his arm as if removing the object might remove what it had already done. You're making this impossible. No, I said. I'm making it reviewable. That line changed the energy in the room because it shifted us fully out of family emotion and into procedural consequence. Randall sat straighter. Lenora, who had spent most of the evening trying to stay attached to the winning side, no longer looked sure there was one. Bree stopped shrinking and simply watched. My father looked at me with the cold restraint he used when he wanted everyone else to mistake intimidation for reason. You are upsetting your mother at her own mother's memorial dinner. I let the sentence sit there for a second. Bro, he had tried to hide inside it. You used her mother's memorial dinner to advance Nolan's position. His jaw tightened. My mother closed her eyes. No one defended him. The waiter returned then, carrying the dessert tray he had clearly been told to send in on schedule. He stopped when he saw all four adults at the center of the table no longer pretending to eat. Then looked uncertainly toward my father. Not now. My father snapped. The waiter nodded and withdrew, but the damage was done. Staff had now walked into the tension twice. This was no longer a difficult family conversation. It was a scene with witnesses who had no investment in the family myth. Good. Nolan set the folder back down, perhaps realizing too late that holding it made him look more possessive, not more credible. The house needs someone stable, he said. Someone close. Someone who can actually manage it. There it was again. Not just transfer. Qualification. He was no longer arguing process. He was arguing fitness. I looked at him carefully. You mean someone without a child? He did not answer quickly enough. My mother did. No one said that. You didn't have to, I said. You cropped Ava out of the picture. Silence. Bree's face changed first. Then Randall's. Even Lenora shifted in her chair, as if the room had finally crossed into territory too ugly to decorate. Nolan tried one last time to regain footing. You live 40 minutes away. You have school pickups, work, Ava. Be realistic. I stood then, slowly, not because I needed height, but because I wanted no one at the table to mistake what came next for a reaction. Realistic? I said. I was realistic when Grandma needed rides, medications, insurance calls, hospice coordination, and someone to keep the lake utilities paid while all of you were too busy to notice what was due. I was realistic when the dock inspection came in. I was realistic when the interim premiums had to be covered. I was realistic when this dinner deposit had to be paid. The only thing I was not was convenient. No one interrupted me. My phone was still on the table between us. Daphne's text glowed faintly before the screen dimmed. The trust clause sat beside the bell and rose confirmation. The changed host line. The early file. Who? Oh! The transfer page. The voicemail about occupancy. Their own sequencing had finally built a cage around them. I looked at my father. You said you wanted to handle this quietly first. He said nothing. I looked at my mother. You changed the room before the process. She did not deny it. Then I looked at Nolan. And you started arguing who was fit to hold the house before the review even began. His face hardened. Maybe because someone has to protect what Grandma built. That was the line he should not have used. Because now he had made it moral in front of witnesses, and morality was the one place where he had less ground than anyone in the room. I picked up the cropped photograph, held it once, and set it beside the trust papers. No, I said. You're trying to inherit what you didn't protect. And across the table, I could feel the last safe version of his story begin to split open. My words were still in the air when the door opened again. This time it was not a waiter but Celeste Morano from Belle and Rose's event team, holding a tablet against her chest. with the careful expression of someone who knew a private room had turned into a problem with money underneath it. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, looking first at me, then at my mother. "There's a payment issue I need clarified before we close the room." My mother answered too quickly. "That can wait." Celeste did not move. "I'm afraid it can't. We received a request this afternoon to transfer the remaining balance and host authorization to another party. But the payment method on file does not allow that without the original payer's approval." The room changed instantly. I looked at Nolan. He was staring at the tablet. So that was it. He had not only tried to center himself at the dinner, he had tried to move the room itself under his name before the night was over. Celeste glanced down. "The payer on file is Olivia Holloway." The reassignment request listed Nolan Holloway as host contact for final settlement and event archive release. "We need confirmation from Miss Holloway before we process anything." Bree covered her mouth. Randall stopped pretending neutrality. Even Lenora looked at Nolan differently. My father stood. "This is inappropriate." Celeste kept her voice calm. "I understand, sir. I was asked to resolve it tonight." Asked. Not automatic. Not routine. Asked. I held out my hand. "May I see it?" She passed me the tablet. The request sat there in clean black text. Host reassignment and payment closure request. Submitted 4:43 p.m. Requested by Nolan Holloway, primary family representative. Original payer unable to attend. I handed it back. "Do not authorize any reassignment. Keep the account exactly as filed." "Of course," Celeste said. My mother tried to step in. "This is a misunderstanding. I only need the payer's confirmation," Celeste said. "You have it," I replied. She nodded, then added, "Because the archive request was submitted with the host change, the memorial photo package has also been restricted. No images will be released under revised names without payer authorization." That landed even harder than the payment issue. Nolan had not only tried to control the room, he had tried to control the official version of it after the evening ended. When Celeste left, the silence felt clean and irreversible. No one could hide inside interpretation anymore. Nolan had filed a request, named himself the primary family representative, and written me out before I even arrived. Bree looked at him first. "You told them she wasn't coming?" Nolan's face tightened. "I assumed." "No," I said. "You planned." Randall pushed his chair back slightly. "You were trying to transfer the event record too?" "It was administrative cleanup," Nolan said. I looked at him. "Administrative cleanup is what you call it when you want the story to look natural afterward." My father made one last attempt to recover control. "Enough. This has gone far beyond what your grandmother would have wanted." "No," Randall said. The room turned toward him. "What June wouldn't have wanted," he said, "was a memorial dinner used to position one grandchild over another." That was the real break. In families like mine, collapse begins when the quiet people stop protecting the lie. Lenora set down her glass. "Nolan, did you really submit that request before dinner?" He did not answer quickly enough. My mother lowered herself back into her chair. The candle nearest the display board bent and spilled wax down the holder in a crooked pale line. It looked like something formal unraveling under heat. Nolan straightened and forced confidence into his voice. "Somebody had to keep things organized. Olivia turns everything into a control system." That gave me the line I needed. "I built the control system you keep trying to steal," I said. "No one moved. I paid the deposit. I handled the care. I kept the property current. I kept the records. You wanted the host line, the archive, the folder, and the house, because you thought that if you touched enough pieces first, people would get used to seeing you in the center." My mother covered her mouth. Bree looked down. Randall did not. "You should leave the folder there," he said to Nolan. Nolan gave a bitter laugh. "You're taking her side now?" Randall held his gaze. "I'm taking the side that won't end with attorneys asking why a memorial dinner turned into a pre-transfer staging event." Even Lenora recoiled at that wording. My father's face flattened. "No one is accusing anyone of illegality. I am accusing him of lying," I said. And of trying to create visual control before legal review. That was enough. Everyone at the table had now seen the full chain. The wrong time, the missing name, the cropped photograph, the early file, the transfer page, the trust clause, Daphne's text, the host reassignment, and the archive request. What Nolan had built was not a misunderstanding. It was a system. My mother looked at him with something I had not seen in her all night. Not loyalty, recognition. Nolan, she said quietly, why did you tell them Olivia wouldn't attend? He looked at her, and for the first time that evening, had no polished answer ready. That was the assumption, he said. No, my mother said, and her voice broke on the word. It wasn't. The room accepted that. Bree stood first and reached for her bag. Randall stood after her. Lenora hesitated, then rose as well. That was the social collapse, not shouting or spectacle, but people deciding in full view that they no longer wanted to remain inside Nolan's version of the evening. I stayed where I was. The trust clause remained visible. The bell and rose confirmation sat near the center of the table. The folder was still under Nolan's hand, but it no longer looked like authority. It looked like evidence. My mother stared at the cropped photograph of Ava and June, then looked at me. I didn't think he would go this far, she said quietly. I believed her, but it changed nothing. Across the table, Nolan was still standing in the center of the arrangement he had built, except the arrangement no longer held. The witnesses were stepping away. My father's authority had failed. My mother's staging had collapsed, and the room he had meant to use as proof of succession had become the place where everyone finally saw exactly how much of the structure had always belonged to me. By the time the room emptied, no one had the appetite to pretend we were still at a memorial dinner. Bree and Randall had already left. Lenora followed after a strained, useless touch to my mother's shoulder that looked more like self-protection than comfort. The candles had burned low enough to lose their elegance. The fish had gone cold, the wine sat unfinished, and the framed photograph of Ava and Grandma still rested near the center of the table. No longer decoration, but evidence of what had been cut away to make the evening cleaner. My father was the first to reach for authority again, but the effort had gone flat. We will deal with this privately, he said. I looked at the folder still under Nolan's hand. You will deal with it through Mercer and Vale. That was the difference now. Earlier, they had still believed the family could absorb the truth and reshape it into something survivable. By then, the structure had moved outside the room. Belle and Rose had the host record. Mercer and Vale had the trust procedure. Daphne had Nolan's voicemail. The account trail showed who paid, who changed the event line, and when the reassignment request was submitted. None of that needed my anger to stay alive. It only needed to exist. My mother sat down slowly, as though the evening had finally caught up with her body. Olivia, she said, her voice thin and tired. Please don't turn this into a war. I almost answered the old way. I almost softened for her, almost accepted the role I had held for years, the one where I translated harm into something smaller so the family could survive its own reflections. But that role was part of what had brought us here, so I left the softness out. This became a war when you decided grief was the right cover for replacing me. She looked down. My father said nothing. Nolan still stood at the head of the table, but he no longer looked central. He looked stranded. I picked up my phone and opened a new message to Daphne first. Do not respond to Nolan directly. Mercer and Vale needs to handle all review through formal notice. He tried to move host status and archive records tonight. I have witnesses. Call me when you can. Then I sent a second message to the probate paralegal at Mercer and Vale, attaching photographs I had just taken of the transfer page, the trust clause, and the Bell and Rose confirmation. Please note that estate-related transfer material for the Holloway Lake property appeared tonight at a memorial event before Monday's formal review. There was also an attempt to create host and representative status around the event tied to the same property narrative. I am requesting that all communication regarding the lake property proceed only through formal trustee procedure with written notice to all required parties. I did not announce what I was doing. I did not need to. My father recognized the law firm name on the screen and stopped speaking altogether. that was the financial collapse, though none of them said the word out loud. Nolan's advantage had depended on momentum, on informal positioning, on getting there first. Once Mercer and Vale was back in the center, that advantage was gone. He could no longer turn the room into proof. He could no longer move the event record. He could no longer use my expected absence to smooth the next step. Whatever deal he thought he was building around the house had just lost its easiest path. My mother noticed my phone again. "You already contacted them?" "Yes." Nolan's head snapped toward me. "Tonight?" I met his eyes. "You did." That ended him more completely than any accusation could have. He looked away first, then at the folder, then at the display board with its elegant lie still standing by the window. For the first time all evening, he seemed to understand what had actually happened. He had not merely lost an argument. He had lost the room, the timeline, the neutral witnesses, the family's silent compliance, and the ability to act before procedure caught up with him. My father took a breath like he was preparing one last strategy, then let it go. He knew what the rest of us knew by then. Anything said after the documents would only become another thing the documents could contradict. My mother's eyes moved to the cropped photograph again. I really didn't notice Ava was gone. I believed her. That was why it hurt. Not because she had chosen the crop with deliberate cruelty, but because she had become willing to accept a version of the family that required certain people to disappear if the image was going to feel orderly. Me, my daughter, the actual labor, the actual memory, the actual care. I picked up the photograph and slid it into my bag. "You don't get to keep this version," I said. No one argued. That was the social collapse. Not more people leaving, not raised voices, not one final dramatic confession, but the quiet death of their shared version of events. My father had lost command of the room. My mother could no longer defend the staging. Nolan had lost the relatives who made his positioning look natural. Even if no one spoke of the dinner again, they would remember it correctly now. And then there was the last part, the only one that mattered to me beyond the papers. Ava. She had spent the evening at my friend Marisol's apartment 3 blocks away. Wearing the black cardigan she had insisted made her look respectful like Grandma June. Before dinner, she had hugged me at the door and asked whether the grown-ups were going to be strange tonight. I had told her, probably. She had nodded like that was a weather condition and not a family trait. I stood, gathered the trust clause, the confirmation page, and my phone, and left the estate folder where it was. Nolan did not stop me. My father did not give instructions. My mother did not ask me to stay. At the door, I paused only once. "Monday happens through the firm," I said without turning back. No side calls, no side summaries, no more assumptions. Then I walked out. The hallway outside Bell and Rose smelled faintly of citrus polish and rain blown in from the river. Downstairs, the hostess looked up, recognized me, and offered the kind of careful smile people give when they know a private room has ended badly, but want to return one small piece of dignity to the person who deserved more of it. I thanked her, settled the remaining balance under my own name, and asked for the original archive package to be sent only to the payer on file. Then I left with the memorial photographs, the proof, and the evening still intact in the only way that mattered. Marisol buzzed me up without asking questions. Ava was asleep on her couch under a knitted blanket, one shoe still on, her hair half fallen from its ribbon. Beside her, Marisol had set out the little paper place card Ava had made that morning in glitter pen. "For Great-Grandma June." I stood there longer than I meant to. That was the emotional shift. Not forgiveness. Not relief. Recognition. My family had spent the evening trying to convert June's legacy into a cleaner chain of control. But the truth of it was here, in a sleeping child who had been loved enough to be woven into the life of that house. In the routines that had made a place feel inherited long before anyone tried to own it, and in the records that proved care had structure even when other people tried to erase it. I took off Ava's shoe, folded the blanket closer around her, and sat beside her until Marisol brought me tea I barely touched. My phone buzzed once more before midnight. It was Mercer Vale. Received. Monday will proceed under formal notice only. No preliminary action will be recognized outside procedure. I read it, locked the screen, and set the phone face down. That was enough. Not because I had won something theatrical, because the structure had stopped lying. The next week would bring calls, shame, rewrites, maybe apologies dressed as explanations. Nolan would lose the informal leverage he thought he had created. My father would discover that volume could not move a trust clause. My mother would have to live with the dinner she built and the daughter she tried to edit into the background. The lake house would go through the process it was always supposed to go through, under notice, review, and the names my grandmother had actually protected. But that night, sitting beside Ava in the dim apartment light, I did not think about revenge. I thought about June, about the dock in early morning, the blue guest room, the warm towels, the seashell drawer, the way she had looked at Ava one summer afternoon and said, with that dry certainty of hers, that a house remembers who fills it with life, and who only arrives once the lights are already on. In the end, that was what my family had misunderstood. They thought legacy lived in the folder, the title line, the room, the transfer page, the public image. It didn't. It lived in the people who kept showing up. And by then, I no longer needed to prove that I had never been replaceable, because the entire structure they tried to use against me had already said it for me.